Hey everybody, this is Inanna. I was just in there and we're going to be talking today. We're going to talk about Theseus. Theseus was a part of Greek legend and he looked like this. He had a problem. He was part cow and part man. Okay? Now, Theseus, Theseus is one of the more important heroes of Greek legend, but his full renown is of relatively late growth and peculiar to Attica. In fact, Theseus has two aspects, which may be called the heroic and the political. In his heroic aspect, he is an adventurer, subduer of monsters, and chaser of women, after the fashion of Hercules, on whom he came to be modeled. Now, in his political aspect, he is a symbol of Athens and of Attic unity and power, indeed, almost the only hero to become such an established symbol. He is treated for all the purposes as a historical figure, even by sober writers of prose such as Aristotle. For the reason Plutarch brackets him with another legendary figure in his parallel lives of Greeks and Romans, the founder of Rome, Romulus. Though the ordinary Greek legend was not separate from the history of earlier periods, in the case of Theseus, this distinction must be made in some form, but it is not enough to argue simply that his heroic Theseus in this marvelous adventures is purely legendary. While the political Theseus is historical in the sense of being a man who really lived, for the political Theseus is a figure answering to other needs of the Attic imagination, but hardly less fictitious, both of them fiction. As a Pan-Hellenic hero, Theseus is a relatively minor figure of the duration before the Trojan War, by no means of such stature as his contemporary Hercules or some other figures. He is connected in legend. He is connected in legend with Trojan in the eastern Peloponnese, but otherwise only with Attica, apart from the regions listed in the Adventures and Wanderings. And for the Athenians of classical times, he was not the only slayer of the Minotaur, but also the author of a great political change, a synoikismos, which is to say the incorporation of all Attic communities into a single state called Athens. In Attic legend, he is also the pattern of the humane ruler who receives refugees and unfortunates. Since Attica is never in his time ravaged by war, from Plutarch's Life of Theseus and from two other compilers, Diodorus and Apollodorus, the outline of Theseus' life can be told. This is unfortunate because there is no continuous and complete narrative in extant poetry, in even vanished epic poems of Attica, such as the Theseus and the Maias, which are later than the Iliad and the Odyssey, do not seem, from remaining fragments or from reference in other writers, to have the whole story. Theseus was born in Trojans to Athena, daughter of King Piteus. In Athenian legend, his father was King Aegeus of Athens, who returned to Athens before he was born, leaving under a hollow rock a sword and a pair of sandals to be claimed by his son when he was big enough to raise the rock. In the Trojan legend, his father has the god Poseidon, who has an important part even in the Athenian legend. Having lifted the rock, Theseus then made his way to Athens. However, he did not take the easy way by sea. He went by land, overcoming and killing dangerous robbers, such as Periphetes, who attacked travelers with his club, Sinus, who bent down pine trees, tied his victim to the top, and then let the trees spring up and apart to tear from limb to limb. Cursion, who forced men to wrestle with him until he killed them. Scurion, who made travelers wash his feet on the top of a purposes so that he could kick them over, and Procrustes, who forced them to fit one of his two beds stretched out of the shorter travelers to fit the length bed, and lopping the taller to fit the shorter. He also killed the ravaging sow of Crimion. On being welcomed by Aegeus, a drink offered to the witch Medea, then married to Aegeus, but Aegeus recognized him and cried out in time. Aegeus then told Theseus of the affliction of the Athenians suffered at the hands of Minos of Crete. In vengeance for the killing of his son Androgenes of Attica, Minos every year carried off a band of Athenian youths and maidens to be given as victim to the Minotaur. This was a monster with a human body and a bull's head, usually said to have been kept in the labyrinth of Theseus, a building designed in the form of an intricate maze, from which no one who entered could find his way out. Food for the Minotaur. Theseus went voluntarily to one of the victims, and when he arrived to Crete, he won the help of Ariadne, daughter of Minos. She gave him a ball of thread to unwind as he made his way into the labyrinth and follow so that he could find his way out again. He killed the Minotaur with his sword and then set off homeward in triumph with the captives, who were no longer needed as food for the Minotaur. He took Adrian with him, but left her behind on the island of Dia off the coast near Crossmus, or, as was more commonly said, on the island of Naxos, where the god Dionysus found her and took her as his wife. As Theseus approached Athens, he forgot to change the black sail of his ship, a sign of mourning for the young Athenians, for a white one would be a sign of deliverance. They had promised to do if he came home safe. Aegeus, who was looking out for him, concluded that he had perished and hurled himself from a cliff. Theseus just became king of Athens. He had to fight rivals, the son of Peleus, brother of Aegeus, but prevailed over them. He subdued the wild bull of Marathon, being sheltered on his way by an old peasant woman, Hecate. In an expedition with Hercules and others to Themyscira, where the Amazons lived in the south coast of the Black Sea. He carried off an Amazon, Antiope, or according to the others, Hippolyta, and made her his wife. He later repudiated her and married Phaedra, daughter of Minos. The Amazons made war on him, invading Attica, and were with a great effort defeated by his Amazon wife, who had a son, Hippolytus. He also carried off Helen as a girl from Laconia, but she was brought home by force while he was away by her brothers Castor and Polydeuce. Theseus was in Hades at the time with his friend Pirithous the Lapith, who was attempting to carry off Persephone, queen of the underworld. Pluto, however, cunningly persuaded Theseus and Pirithous to sit on seats to which their flesh grew. Theseus was rescued by Hercules, who could not free Pirithous. When Theseus eventually returned to Athens, he found that the people were disaffected. He left for the land of Scyros, where the king Lacomedes, fearing that he meant to annex the island, treacherously thrust him off a cliff. A skeleton of great size, said to be his, was found on Scyros centuries later and carried to Athens by Simon. The adventures given in the framework appear here and there in surviving poetry, including some celebrated plays which introduce something of his other act of statesman. Within extant poetry, the earliest mention of Theseus is in a speech by Nestor in the Iliad. Nestor compares the warriors at Troy to the disadvantage with the earlier generation, which included Pirithous and Theseus, son of Aegeus. They were like the immortals, the mightiest of men who fight the mightiest of enemies, the best men of the hills. The reference is to the centaurs whom Pythios and his Lapithae subdued with the help of Theseus. In the Odyssey, there is a mention of the ghost of Ariadne in Hades, whom Theseus wished to bring from Crete to Athens, but who was slain by Artemis on the passage. The Odyssey also relates that Odysseus was seeing the phantom of Hercules, also hoped to see the ghosts of Theseus and Pythias. The expedition of the two heroes to Hades must have been known to Homer. According to Hesiod, as reported in Atheist and Plutarch, Theseus abandoned Ariadne because he took a fancy to the maiden's hippie and ale, and damaged Prius contains a fragment of Hesiodic poem, The Descent of Pythias, in which the ghost of Theseus in Hades tells the ghost of Meleager how he and Pirithous came down the entry to carry off Persephone. Meleager apparently hears the story with disgust. In the remains of the epic cycle, the poems of the same type of the Iliad and Odyssey, but later and inferior, there's an occasional allusion to Theseus. In the Nostoi, it is said that the love of Antiope for Theseus had led her to betray the Themyscira to him and Hercules. In the Crypia, Theseus is said to have carried off Helen and to have kept her until she was rescued by her brothers, the Discuri. Among the lyrics, poets Alcman, as reported by Pausanias, tells how the Discuri, retrieving Helen, took Athens while Theseus was away and captured his mother Athea. Siscoria says that Helen was pregnant at the time of her rescue and gave birth to Argos, to an infant which she handed over to her sister Clytemnestra before she herself married Menelaus. Pindar tells much the same story, explaining that Theseus kept Helen because he wished to become brother-in-law to the Dioscuri. Palace under the sea. But the most celebrated treatment of Theseus in lyric is found in two poems of Bacchylides. In Dithram, Aegeus is presented a conversation with a chorus about the approach of a remarkable stranger coming from Trojan. Aegeus has heard that he has killed Sidus and other robbers and the sow of Crimea. The two men are accompanying him. He wears a sword, a Lanconian helmet, a red tunic, and a woolen Thessalonian cloak. His hair is flame colored, and he darts from his eyes a red flame like the earth fire of Lemnos. He is in the flower of his youth. His thoughts are of weapons, and he is making for Athens. In Dithgaram, Theseus is shown sailing to Crete in the charge of Minos with the captive youths and maidens. He disputes with Minos, who was laying his hands on one of the maidens, claiming that Minos is son of Zeus. He himself is son of Poseidon. Zeus gives a clap of thunder as a sign for Menes, who throws his ring into the sea, challenging Theseus to die for it. Theseus plunges in and reaches Poseidon's palace under the sea, where he is greeted by Amphitrite and presented with a bright garment. He comes up to the surface still dry, and the Naiads sing around him as he returns on board. In Attic drama, Theseus is prominent in Sophocles, Oedipus at Colonus, and in Euripides, Mad Hercules, Hippolyticus, and Supplantians, and in the Oedipus of Colonus, the aged and blind Oedipus, exiled from Thebes, is received in Attica at Colonus with a refugee with his two daughters. Theseus gives him protection and will not allow Creon of Thebes to carry off his daughters. In the reward, Odysseus appeals to Theseus alone, where he must die in Attica, and how when he has disappeared beneath Attic earth, his presence will be a blessing to Attica. Only Theseus sees the manner of his death, and on oath reveals his no one except his heirs. And for his service, Oedipus will hold Athens unscathed from any attack that may come from the Thebans who cast him out. Sophocles also wrote in Phaedra, which has perished. It dealt with the adulterous passion of Phaedra, wife of Theseus, for her stepson Hippolytus. But details are not known. It is believed that at the time of the action, Theseus is supposed to be away. A mad Hercules, Euripides, relates how Hercules, after recovering from the fit of madness in which he killed his children, is brought to Attica from Thebes by Theseus and cleansed from the defilement of his dead. He is also received and is promised of a place to dwell in recognition of his services to the Greeks, including Theseus. So, too, in the Suppliants, Theseus supports the claim of Adrastus, the survivor among the chiefs who led the great Argive expedition against Thebes to receive back the dead from the Thebans. Of the Thebans will not yield, Theseus will make war on them, and after putting the proposal to the Athenian people for their approval, he receives back the bodies of the Argive troops which the Athenians bury at Cithaeron, while those other leaders are brought to Eleusis in Attica for the burning, before the bones and ashes are taken to Argos. In the Hippolytus, Theseus has a very different part. There were two versions of which the older, now lost, presented Phaedra in the style of Potiphar's wife, as perhaps Sophocles did, attempting to seduce Hippolytus, and then she failed, denouncing him for an attempt on her virtue. And the later one, which survives, Phaedra at first takes no actions and conceals her passion until she is ill with it. Her old nurse induces her to confess it and otherwise reveals it to Hippolytus. making overtures in Phaedra's name without her permission. Hippolytus recoils in horror and upbraids Phaedra for advances which she did not make. Phaedra hangs herself, leaving a written message to Theseus accusing Hippolytus of rape. And on his return, Theseus believes the messages and curses Hippolytus, driving him into exile. As Hippolytus drives along the shore, Poseidon, carrying out this curse, sends a bull from the sea to terrify his horses. They smash his chariot and drag him until he is nearly dead. The goddess Artemis then appears to tell Theseus the truth, and he is reconciled to his dying son. Theseus appears here only as a deceived, outraged, and hasty husband and father, but in the other plays he appears as a humane ruler and a certain leaning toward democracy. Episodes of Theseus's career are treated in Alexandrian poetry. Bion remarks that all lovers are happy, even Theseus, when he went down into the placable Hades, because Perithous was at his side. The remains of Calamidua's Hecale tell how the old peasant woman Hecale entertained Theseus on his way to capture the bull of Marathon, but was dead when he returned. It has been argued that Theseus was originally a hero of the Ionian Greeks who lived in the northern Peloponnese as well as in the Attica and Euboea before the Dorian and West Greek invasion, so that his connection with Trojan, a Dorian city, its classical times goes back to the Mycenaean period. Within Attica, he seems originally to have belonged to the northeastern region about Marathon. The power of Minos over Attica would represent the power of rulers in Gnostus, who were already in the 15th century BC. Greeks rather than Minoans, though Knossos fell later to other Greeks, were from the mainland. Theseus' defeat of the robbers between Trojan and Athens may be a fairly late development of his stories, but much earlier than the 6th century BC. Friend of democracy. He was considered a friend of democracy. Okay, and the political Theseus, no doubt, was ancient roots in Attic tradition, but he appears to define form first in Thucydides and in plays of Euripides, which applied forms of thought belonging to the 5th century BC heroic legend. According to Thucydides, Attica before Theseus' reign was divided between separate communities, which had their own authorities and took little common counsel in action, except in face of external peril. The shrewd and energetic Theseus abolishes these local assemblies and directed their members to meet in Athens, though the rest of the local inhabitants still lived separately. But the death of Theseus, Athens had become a large and powerful state, and the Athenians date their political unity from that time. Euripides in the Suppliants even makes Theseus claims to have set the people free. The exercise equal votes and to elect annual officers, and equal part of these to be chosen by the poor. In Socrates and Plutarch regard Theseus' constitution as a historical creation, a mixture of various elements which was intended to be just and stable and was later gradually improved until finally it was transformed for the worse into extreme democracy. Some oligarchs regarded Theseus' concessions to the people as the remote beginning of decay. The truth, symbolized by his treatment of Theseus alone among epic heroes, is that Attic society and even the Attic state had a continuous existence since heroic or historically since Mycenaean times. In the other regions of Greece overrun by the Dorians, the heroic or Mycenaean society had been swept away and no such continuity could be claimed. So that is what I have on Theseus. And you'll see my short on it as well. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.